I stood by Daniella's side from the day we started our company in a cold, damp basement until the moment we stood together and rang the bell celebrating our IPO. For 10 long years, I gave everything I had to help her climb higher in the world of business, supporting her every step of the way. Everyone around us believed we would eventually get married. I believed it too. But on the very day our company went public, she walked onto the stage with another man, holding his arm as she proudly announced their engagement. Then she looked at me and said, "You'll always be important to me, but he's the man I truly want." In that single moment, everything became painfully clear. I had never been the man she loved. I had only been the person she needed to change her life. And if she could treat me like nothing more than a stepping stone, then I would show her a lesson of my own. In the world of business, the person who falls in love first never wins. The one who wins is the one willing to take everything without hesitation. The celebration on the top floor of the hotel no longer felt like a celebration. I walked straight toward Daniella and the man standing beside her. Looking directly into her eyes, I asked quietly, "Aren't you going to explain this?" The smile disappeared from her face, replaced by the calm, controlled expression I knew so well. She gently squeezed Robert's hand, silently asking him to stay back before stepping toward me. "Simon," she said softly, "I'll explain everything later. This isn't the right place." I looked at her in disbelief. Then when was the right place? Was it 10 years ago when we shared a tiny leaking apartment and survived on 1 cup of instant noodles? Or 5 years ago when the company almost collapsed and you cried in my arms, telling me it was just the two of us against the world? As I spoke, the color slowly drained from her face. Robert frowned and moved slightly in front of her, trying to shield her. "President Koo, Daniella," he started. "Shut up," I interrupted without even looking at him. My eyes never left Daniella. "I'm asking her." She took a slow breath before meeting my gaze. There was no warmth left in her eyes anymore, only determination. "Simon," she said in the same calm voice she used during board meetings, "I've told you before, you'll always be the person I trust the most. You'll always be important to me. But some places in life don't belong to someone simply because they stayed the longest or suffered the most beside me. Robert can give me a more stable future, a more respectable life, and our marriage will help the company's next stage of growth." I almost laughed because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Every word cut deeper than the last. I remembered all those nights when she fell asleep on my shoulder after working until exhaustion, and I silently promised myself I would give her the happiest life possible. I remembered comforting her after clients mocked her background and family, wiping away her tears while telling her that one day we would stand so high that those same people would have no choice but to look up at us. But now I realized the future I fought so hard to build still wasn't respectable enough for her. Everything I gave her couldn't compete with a marriage built on status and business. Robert wrapped his arm around her shoulders and smiled with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. "President Koo," he said politely, "everyone knows the incredible journey you and Daniella shared while building this company. Arion Group will still need you in the future. As for everything else, I hope you'll understand and give us your blessing." Blessing. My eyes fell to the hand resting on Daniella's shoulder, then to the way she naturally leaned toward him. I couldn't stop myself from letting out a quiet laugh. In the silent ballroom, the sound felt strangely out of place. "Good," I said with a nod. "Really good." I took a slow step backward, looking from Daniella to Robert and then around the room filled with uncomfortable faces watching us. "Daniella, I spent 10 years beside you. We started with absolutely nothing, and together we built this company until it went public. So tell me honestly, what was I to you?" She pressed her lips together and stayed silent for several long moments before finally answering with words that completely shattered what remained of my heart. "You are my most trusted business partner," she said quietly. "The other half of Arion Group, someone who can never be replaced. But Robert is the person I want standing beside me for the rest of my life." That was the answer. 10 years of love, sacrifice, sleepless nights, shared dreams, and surviving every hardship together had been reduced to just 2 words in her eyes. Business partner. I looked at Daniella for a long moment, and suddenly everything felt meaningless. It all seemed so unbelievable that I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. The only things left inside me were emptiness and a coldness I had never felt before. I gave a small nod, turned around without saying another word, and walked toward the ballroom exit. Behind me, I could hear Robert quietly comforting her, followed by Daniella's soft sigh. I stepped into the elevator, leaving behind the dazzling lights, expensive decorations, and suffocating celebration. As the elevator slowly descended, I leaned against the cold metal wall and watched the floor numbers change one by one. 10 years of memories replayed in my mind like scenes from an old movie. I saw us sitting in that tiny apartment with rain leaking through the ceiling, sharing instant noodles because that was all we could afford. I remembered the night we won our first major contract, laughing and crying together in the middle of an empty street after midnight. I remembered the financial crisis when we mortgaged everything we owned and held each other tightly because we were terrified of losing it all. Then my mind returned to tonight. Daniella stood beside another man with her arm wrapped around his, smiling in a way I had never seen before. She looked shy, peaceful, and completely certain. It was the face of a woman deeply in love. My stomach suddenly twisted so hard that I doubled over, trying to throw up, but nothing came out except burning acid rising into my throat. When the elevator reached the lobby, I straightened my tie, forced myself to stand tall, and walked outside into the freezing night. My driver, Mason, quickly pulled the car over. The moment he saw my face, his expression changed. "President Koo, are you all right?" he asked carefully. "Take me back to the apartment," I replied, my voice rough and exhausted as I climbed into the back seat. "Not the company? Miss Daniella just called," he started to say. I closed my eyes and interrupted him. I said, "Take me back to the apartment." The car pulled into traffic while the city lights flashed past the windows. This was the city we had spent 10 years conquering together. Yet tonight it felt unfamiliar, distant, and colder than ever. I took out my phone and looked at my last conversation with Daniella. Her final message from the night before was still there. "After tomorrow, everything is going to be a brand new beginning. Fighting, my President Koo." I stared at those words for several seconds before letting out a bitter smile. A brand new beginning. She had been right, just not in the way I had imagined. I locked the screen and quietly told Mason, "Pull over." He did without asking questions. I got out and walked toward the railing beside the river. The water stretched endlessly into the darkness while the bright skyline reflected across its surface in broken pieces. Those shattered lights looked exactly like my heart. 10 years. I had started as a broke construction worker who sometimes slept under bridges, and somehow I had become the chairman of a publicly listed company worth billions. I gave the woman I loved everything I had. My time, my future, my heart, my loyalty, my success, and every dream I carried. Then, on the happiest day of my life, she pushed me over the edge and stood beside another man, smiling as if I had never mattered. The cold wind from the river cut across my face. I pulled a cigarette from the pack, lit it, and watched the red glow burn quietly in the darkness. When I was halfway through it, I took out my phone and called someone I almost never contacted. After 3 rings, a calm voice answered. "Mr. Koo." "Caleb?" I said, watching the smoke disappear into the wind. "The insurance policy I asked you to prepare in secret 3 years ago, is it still in place?" There was a brief silence before he replied. "Yes, it's been maintained exactly as instructed. Completely hidden, completely isolated, and completely confidential." I looked across the river at the lights shining from the top floor of Arion Group's headquarters. "Activate it," I said quietly. "Right now." I dropped the cigarette to the ground and crushed it beneath my shoe. "There's one more thing. I want you to investigate 2 people, Daniella and Robert. Every phone call, every financial transaction, every private meeting, every project they've been involved in during the last." I stopped for a second as my voice turned colder. "No, make that the last 6 months. I want every detail." Caleb answered without hesitation. "Understood. I'll activate the network tonight, and you'll have the complete report by tomorrow evening." His voice stayed calm, as if I had simply assigned another routine task. Only the two of us knew what the insurance policy truly was. For years earlier, I had quietly built it without Daniella ever knowing. Maybe it came from instinct, or maybe it was because I had always feared that money and power could change people. I hired Caleb, one of the best experts in corporate intelligence and risk management, and through completely independent funding, we secretly placed people who were loyal only to me inside several of the company's most important departments. Those people never took part in the company's daily operations. Their only job was to quietly watch for anything unusual and report directly to me at regular intervals. They were like a hidden immune system built into the company. I honestly never believed I would have to use them. More than once, I convinced myself I was simply overthinking things. After everything Daniella and I had survived together, how could she possibly betray me? But reality proved I had been wrong in the cruelest way imaginable. "There's something else," I said, my voice as cold as the wind blowing across the river. "Starting tomorrow, suspend every Arion Group fund transfer that requires my final approval. Hold every document waiting for my signature, and tell everyone I'm unwell and need complete rest." Caleb was silent for a moment before replying, "Mr. Koo, that will create serious instability inside the company. The IPO just happened. This is an extremely sensitive period." "Then let it shake," I answered without hesitation. "And one more thing. Gather the gambling agreement related to Star Glow Tech, along with all the evidence showing Daniella's private investment in the Blue Ocean project through offshore shell companies. Organize everything and anonymously send it to the Securities Regulatory Commission and the Commercial Investigation Division. Make sure they receive it at exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning." Star Glow Tech was the flagship project Daniella had pushed harder than anyone else. The risk-sharing agreement behind it was reckless enough that, if exposed, it could send Arion Group's stock price crashing. The Blue Ocean project was even worse. She had secretly hidden it from the board while using it as her own private source of profit. The illegal fund transfers and backdoor dealings connected to it were more than enough to destroy her reputation. Over the years, I had quietly cleaned up every one of those problems and kept the evidence hidden, believing I would never need it. Now those same safeguards had become weapons. On the other end of the call, I noticed Caleb's breathing grow slightly heavier before he answered, "Understood. I'll take care of everything immediately." After hanging up, I stood by the river for a long time until the cold completely numbed my hands and feet. When I finally returned home, I stepped into an ice-cold shower. The freezing water soaked my body, but it couldn't wash away the anger burning inside me or the pain buried deep in my heart. I sat alone in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights slowly disappear as the gray light of dawn spread across the skyline. The empire we had spent 10 years building had collapsed in a single night. Before sunrise, I put on a black suit and tied a dark red tie Daniella had never seen before. "Where to, President Koo?" Mason asked in his usual calm voice. "The company," I replied as I adjusted my cufflinks. "We're attending the executive meeting." The atmosphere inside Arion Group's top-floor conference room was heavy. Senior executives and major shareholders filled the long conference table. Daniella sat at the head of the room, while Robert occupied the seat to her left, a chair that had always remained empty until now. The moment I walked in, every conversation stopped and every pair of eyes turned toward me. I could see surprise, curiosity, and suspicion on every face. Daniella looked up as though she wanted to speak, but I ignored her completely and walked straight to my seat across from her. "Let's begin," I said as I opened the folder in front of me. My voice was calm and completely emotionless. The meeting started as usual with department heads presenting post-IPO reports, but everyone knew no one was really paying attention. The real tension in the room had nothing to do with the reports. Finally, the chief financial officer carefully brought up the second payment for an overseas acquisition. Before he could finish, I interrupted him. "Postpone it." Silence immediately filled the room. Daniella frowned and looked directly at me. "Simon, we've already agreed on the payment schedule. Delaying it could damage our credibility and even cause the acquisition to fail." I calmly met her eyes. "Then let it fail. Right now, the company needs to preserve liquidity to handle post-listing market volatility. Every non-essential major expense is suspended. That's my decision. Her expression hardened. The board already approved this acquisition. I'm the chairman, I replied evenly. I have veto power. Or does my role as your so-called business partner no longer give me the right to make company decisions? The color slowly disappeared from her face. She clearly hadn't expected me to challenge her so openly in front of everyone. Beneath the table, Robert quietly squeezed her hand before speaking in his usual calm tone. President Koo has a point. Stability should come first after the IPO. Perhaps we should take another look at the risks. My eyes drifted to his hand resting over hers, and I silently took in the scene before me. I looked at the hand resting over Daniella's and then, to everyone's surprise, I smiled. Can I ask something? I said calmly. In what capacity is Mr. Robert attending Arion Group's executive meeting today? Is he a shareholder? A board member? Or? I paused for a moment before finishing. Daniella's fiancé? The smile on Robert's face disappeared instantly. Daniella shot to her feet. Simon, do you really have to do this? Robert is he's just here to learn, right? I finished for her. Leaning back in my chair, I slowly looked around the conference room. Everyone, allow me to introduce Mr. Robert. He's Daniella's newly engaged fiancé, and I imagine he'll be taking a more active role in company affairs from now on. You might as well get to know him early. Quiet whispers spread across the room as shocked faces turned toward one another. Some people clearly had no idea about the engagement, while others simply never expected me to reveal it so openly. Daniella stared at me, breathing hard. Her eyes were filled with anger, disappointment, and a hurt I no longer understood. Through clenched teeth, she said, Simon, we'll talk in private. Fine, I replied as I stood up. Meeting adjourned. Daniella, my office. Now, my office was across the hallway. It was smaller than hers, but the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was much better. I walked inside and stood with my back to the door instead of sitting down. A few moments later, Daniella entered and quietly closed the door behind her. What exactly are you trying to do? She demanded, her voice heavy with frustration and exhaustion. That acquisition is critical for our expansion into Europe. You know that better than anyone. And what you did to Robert during the meeting completely humiliated him. I didn't turn around. Instead, I asked calmly, the kickback you privately promised the middleman for that acquisition, was it 5% or 8%? The room fell completely silent. When I finally turned around, Daniella was frozen near the door. The color had drained from her face. How do you know about that? She whispered, her voice trembling. I walked behind my desk and slowly sat down. How I know isn't important. What matters is this, Daniella. When did you start using the company's money to build your own future? Or was it to build a future for that perfectly suitable fiancé of yours? I didn't, she said quickly as she rushed toward the desk, placing both hands on it. Her eyes were already turning red. That kickback is normal in this industry. The company would have benefited in the end. Simon, believe me, I never wanted to hurt the company. We built this business together. Together, I repeated with a bitter smile. That's an interesting word. I looked straight into her eyes. The moment you walked into that celebration holding Robert's arm and announced your engagement, there stopped being an us. There's only you, me, and Robert. She stared at me before letting out a frustrated breath. So this is really about that. It was as though she finally believed she had found the real reason behind everything. Fine. I admit I handled it badly. I should have told you sooner. But Simon, we've spent 10 years together. Doesn't what we have mean more than a marriage certificate? Marrying Robert is simply the most practical decision. You'll always be the most important person in my life. We can still stay the way we've always been. I cut her off before she could continue. The way we've always been? My voice was colder than ever. You want me to watch you go home every night and sleep beside another man? Watch the world celebrate your marriage while I keep working for you? Making money for you? protecting your company, and helping you build your perfect life. I stood up and slowly walked toward her until only a few steps separated us. Looking directly into her tear-filled eyes, I asked quietly, "Daniella, what exactly do you think I am? A dog? Someone you can call whenever you need, throw away whenever you're finished, and still expect to guard your house and wag his tail afterward?" "No," she cried, shaking her head as tears rolled down her face. "How could you think that? What we have is love. We're family. Our connection is bigger than any title or marriage. Why do you keep measuring everything by a wedding? I need a more stable and respectable marriage. Is that really so wrong? Does it have to erase everything between us?" I let out a tired laugh filled with disappointment. "Daniella, I understand you better than anyone. You always knew exactly what I wanted, and that's why you felt comfortable hurting me like this. You believed that no matter what you did, I would understand you, support you, forgive you, and stay beside you forever like some loyal dog. Isn't that the truth?" "No," she whispered again, desperately shaking her head while tears streamed down her face. "Simon, please don't do this," Daniella pleaded through her tears. "Can't we just sit down and talk like we used to?" I slowly stepped back, putting more distance between us as though simply standing too close to her hurt. "Used to," I repeated quietly. "There is no used to anymore, Daniella. The Simon you knew died the moment you walked into that celebration banquet holding Robert's arm and announced your engagement." I looked straight into her eyes. "The man standing in front of you now is the chairman of Arion Group, your business partner, and the enemy who's about to destroy you, your perfect marriage, and everything the two of you are trying to build." Her entire body shook. She stared at me as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Enemy?" she whispered, all the color draining from her face. "You called yourself my enemy?" "Yes," I answered without the slightest emotion. "Your enemy. So stop crying, and stop talking about love that exists beyond labels. From this moment on, it's strictly business." I walked back behind my desk, pressed the intercom, and calmly said, "Secretary, escort Mr. Robert out of the Arion Group building. He's not an employee, and without authorization he's no longer allowed inside the executive offices. If he refuses to leave, call security." "Simon," Daniella shouted. I ended the call and looked at her. "If there's nothing else, please return to your office. The Risk Control Department will conduct a new evaluation of the overseas acquisition. Until that report is complete, every related payment remains frozen. That's my final decision." She stood there staring at me, breathing heavily. The eyes that had once been my entire world were now filled with anger, disbelief, pain, and something I couldn't recognize anymore. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Finally, she turned around, pulled the door open, and stormed out. The slam of the door echoed through the hallway. I remained where I was until her footsteps faded into silence. A few minutes later, my office phone rang. "President Koo," my secretary said carefully. "Mr. Robert has already left the building. However, President Daniella is very upset. She returned to her office and hasn't come out. Director Wang from Finance and Director Liu from Investments also stopped by. They wanted to speak with you." "I'm not meeting anyone," I replied. "Tell everyone I'm unwell and need complete rest. Hold every document waiting for my signature. If something is truly urgent, send it by email." "Understood, President Koo." After hanging up, I sat down and opened my laptop. The blue light from the screen reflected across my face as Caleb's email waited in my inbox. Attached were detailed reports covering every phone call, financial transaction, travel record, and private meeting involving Daniella and Robert over the past 6 months. The information was worse than I expected. They had reconnected at least 6 months ago, possibly even earlier. Many of the business trips, investor meetings, and college reunions Daniella had mentioned suddenly made perfect sense because Robert had been with her during many of them. His family's business had been struggling with serious cash flow problems, and through a series of carefully hidden transactions, Daniella had quietly redirected Arion Group's valuable resources and liquidity to help them. The overseas acquisition was only one piece of a much larger plan. So this was what she meant by a stable future, a respectable marriage, and doing what was best for the company. It wasn't love or responsibility. It was a calculated exchange of benefits and a ruthless betrayal of everything I had given her over the last 10 years. I clicked open another encrypted folder. Inside were years of confidential files Caleb had secretly collected about Daniella's questionable business dealings, along with sensitive information and leverage involving several major shareholders and senior executives. Once, these files had been her protection. I had gathered them to keep her safe if trouble ever came. Now they had become the sharpest weapons in my hands. I took a slow breath and started working. My first email went to several veteran shareholders who had never been comfortable with Daniella's aggressive investment decisions. Attached were screenshots showing early signs of financial irregularities. My second instruction went to one of the trusted people inside our hidden insurance network in the finance department. I ordered him to quietly audit every major fund transfer Daniella had approved, paying special attention to transactions connected with Robert's family business. My third call was to the overseas law firm that had represented us for years. Under my own name, I instructed them to re-examine every clause of the Starglow Tech risk-sharing agreement and uncover every legal weakness and potential liability. I knew none of this would happen overnight. Corporate war wasn't fought with guns or explosions. There was no blood on the floor and no loud battles for the world to see. But it was just as brutal, and sometimes even more devastating. Corporate warfare could be just as brutal as any battlefield. It simply looked quieter from the outside. I knew I couldn't rush anything. Patience was my greatest weapon. I wanted the two people who betrayed me to watch everything they had built slowly fall apart from the inside. I wanted Daniella to finally understand the price of throwing away someone who had loved her with complete honesty. And I wanted Robert to learn that there were some things he never had the right to touch. Over the following days, an invisible storm spread through Arion Group. Officially, I was on medical leave, so I almost completely disappeared from public view. Every instruction I gave went through encrypted emails or Caleb's private channels. Daniella tried over and over to meet with me, but every request was quietly turned away. She continued pushing her proposals during board meetings. Yet the veteran shareholders who had received my information no longer stood firmly behind her. Their attitudes became cautious and uncertain. With my chairman's veto power still in place, every major proposal she introduced was rejected. Before long, the impact of freezing company funds became impossible to ignore. Important projects stalled, business partners grew impatient, and investors started asking uncomfortable questions. After the excitement of the IPO faded, Arion Group's stock price began showing signs of weakness. Daniella realized something was happening. She tried using her authority as CEO to move funds without my approval, but the people inside my hidden insurance network quietly stopped her every time. She reached out to shareholders in private, but none of them gave her a clear answer. Eventually, she started sending messages to my personal phone. At first, she reminded me of our past. Then she accused me of deliberately hurting her, and finally she begged. "Simon, can we please meet and talk? Let's stop hurting each other. Just tell me what you want. If I can do it, I will. Please don't destroy the company we spent 10 years building." I read every message she sent. Then I deleted every one of them without feeling anything and blocked her number. She asked why we were hurting each other, but when someone smiles while driving a knife into your heart, they don't get to ask why you're bleeding. A week later, Caleb contacted me with the update I had been waiting for. The legal team had identified the critical weaknesses hidden inside the Starglow Tech agreement, and the evidence was almost complete. At the same time, the anonymous reports exposing Daniella's illegal involvement in the Blue Ocean project had already reached both the Securities Regulatory Commission and one of the toughest investigators in the Commercial Investigation Division. During our encrypted call, Caleb explained, "The report avoids presenting direct proof, but it clearly points investigators in the right direction. It's more than enough to trigger a formal investigation. Once that begins, Arion Group stock price will almost certainly fall. Daniella will face an internal investigation at the very least, and she could even be suspended. As the investigation expands, Robert's family business will also be dragged into it. Given their financial condition, they probably won't survive the pressure. I looked out the office window at the dark sky and quietly replied, "Good. Now make the fire even bigger. Leak information to several major financial media outlets. Let them suggest that Robert's family has been using Daniella to drain Arion Group's resources and shift their financial problems onto us. Don't give them hard evidence. Just enough information to make people start asking questions." "Understood," Caleb replied before adding, "There's one more thing. Our people have been following Robert. He's recently met several times with representatives from White Cloud's capital. It looks like he's trying to secure funding to rescue his family's company. White Clouds has always wanted the East City land parcel we own." I immediately understood the opportunity. Make sure Daniella accidentally finds out about those meetings. Let the information reach her through someone she trusts. It has to look completely unplanned. "Yes, sir," Caleb answered. After ending the call, I walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured myself another drink. Everything was moving exactly as planned, step by step. I should have felt satisfied. I should have enjoyed watching my revenge unfold. Instead, all I felt was emptiness. 10 years couldn't simply disappear. More than 3,000 days and nights lived together couldn't be erased because of one betrayal. I still remembered surviving on stale bread, sleeping on the office floor, and holding each other when it felt like the whole world was collapsing around us. Those memories had once been warm. Now they cut deeper than any knife ever could. I hated Daniella with everything I had. The hatred reached so deep that it felt like ice inside my bones. Yet there was still a part of me that wanted to remember who we used to be. I forced that thought away. Once an arrow leaves the bow, it can't be called back. A few more days passed before the storm finally revealed itself. The first sign came in the form of a carefully written article published by a respected financial magazine. Without mentioning any names, it hinted that a newly listed company might be secretly transferring benefits to a struggling family-owned business through questionable financial arrangements. No company was mentioned by name, but everyone in the industry immediately understood that the report was about Arion Group. Not long after, officials from the Securities Regulatory Commission and the Commercial Investigation Division arrived for what they described as a routine inspection. Even though it was only a preliminary inquiry, the news spread through the company within minutes. Panic quickly followed, and our stock price dropped sharply. Daniella finally lost her composure. She came straight to my apartment building, but security refused to let her inside. Instead, she stood downstairs shouting my name over and over until her voice became hoarse. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny figure below. Her hair was a mess, her makeup had run, and the confident, elegant woman everyone admired was gone. She looked like someone who had nowhere left to turn. There was a time when I wanted nothing more than to protect her from the world. Now I was the one who had pushed her to this point. I stood there watching for a long time until she finally collapsed from exhaustion. Robert arrived after hearing what had happened and helped pull her away. Before they left, he looked up toward my window. His eyes were filled with hatred so intense that it almost seemed poisonous. Without another thought, I closed the curtains. That night, a message arrived from an unfamiliar number. It was Daniella. "Simon, do you really hate me this much? Are you really willing to destroy everything we built together? Something happened to Robert's family. His father had a heart attack from the stress and is in the hospital. Are you satisfied now? What will it take for you to stop?" I stared at the screen, remembering her desperate face and the hatred in Robert's eyes. Satisfied? Not even close. I replied with a single message. "Break it off." Then I blocked the number. End the engagement. Walk away from Robert. That was the last chance I was willing to give her, although deep down I already knew she would never take it. Her pride, her obsession with finding the respectable and practical choice, everything she had already invested in Robert, and maybe even the feelings she still had for him would never allow her to back down. As expected, no reply ever came. A few days later, the situation exploded again. A well-known financial blogger published a detailed analysis of the Star Glow Technology Valuation Agreement, exposing its hidden risks and unfair terms. The article openly questioned Ariane Group's investment decisions and hinted at possible exchanges of improper benefits. Our stock price fell even further. Soon afterward, rumors about Daniella's questionable handling of the Blue Ocean project and her suspected transfer of benefits spread across the market. There was still no official proof, but investors didn't wait for confirmation. They started pulling their money out. Pressure inside the board reached its limit as several senior shareholders demanded an emergency meeting to discuss whether Daniella should remain CEO. At the same time, Robert's family business began collapsing after White Cloud's Capital conveniently leaked news that they were desperately searching for financing and were even willing to sell off their core technology. Their already fragile supply chain completely fell apart. Banks demanded immediate repayment. Business partners abandoned them one after another, and the company stood on the edge of bankruptcy. Rumors also spread that Robert's father had suffered a stroke after the mounting pressure and was now fighting for his life in intensive care. When a wall begins to fall, everyone rushes over to push it the rest of the way down. I simply stood back and watched the fire I had started slowly consume everything they once valued. Late one night, my apartment doorbell rang over and over again. When the door opened, Robert was standing outside. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair was a mess, and his expensive suit looked like he had slept in it for days. The polished, confident man I had always known was gone. In his place stood someone who looked like a trapped animal with nowhere left to escape. "Simon, you crazy bastard!" he shouted as he tried to force his way inside. But Mason and another bodyguard grabbed him before he could move another step. I leaned against the doorway and looked at him without emotion. "Need something?" He struggled against them, veins standing out across his forehead. "Was it you? Was all of this your doing? The whistleblower letter, the media leaks, White Cloud's Capital. That was all you, wasn't it? You're trying to destroy Daniella, Ariane Group, and my family. If you've got the guts, come after me directly." I let out a quiet laugh, but there wasn't a trace of humor in it. "Robert, you've got this completely wrong. From the beginning, you were never my target. You and Daniella destroyed yourselves with your own greed. Tell me honestly which part of those reports was false. Did Daniella illegally manipulate the Blue Ocean project or not? Didn't your family try to use her to drain Ariane Group's resources? And wasn't the Star Glow technology agreement already a disaster waiting to happen? I didn't create any of those problems. All I did was bring the truth into the light." Robert had no answer. He could only glare at me with pure hatred, breathing hard as he struggled to contain his anger. I took a step closer and looked him up and down with complete indifference. "And you?" I said quietly. "You're nothing more than a spoiled rich kid who's never built anything on his own. You survive by taking advantage of women's feelings and using their resources. Do you honestly think someone like you is important enough for me to target personally?" That was all it took. Robert completely lost control. He fought against the bodyguards holding him back, his face twisted with rage. "Simon, don't get so full of yourself," he shouted. "The person Daniella loves is me. I'm the one she chose. Even if you destroy everything, she'll never come back to you. You'll always be the loser she abandoned. You'll always be pathetic." His words landed exactly where they were meant to. They cut straight into the deepest wound I carried. My expression tightened for just a second before I forced myself back under control. "Love," I repeated with a faint, humorless smile. "Robert, do you really think what you and Daniella have is love? She chose you because you feed the insecurity she's been carrying for years. And you chose her because you wanted Ariane Group and the lifeline your family's business desperately needed. The two of you are actually perfect for each other." I raised my hand toward the bodyguards. "Take him out. And from today forward, don't let him anywhere near this building again." As they dragged him away, his furious shouting echoed down the hallway. "Simon, you won't get away with this. You'll pay for everything you've done." His voice slowly faded until the hallway fell silent. I closed the door, leaned against it, and slowly slid down until I was sitting on the floor. A sharp pain spread through my chest. He was right about one thing. When it came to love, I had lost completely. I had given everything and ended up with nothing. But before long, That pain was swallowed by something colder. Hatred. I wasn't going to remain the fool who had been abandoned. I would become the man who brought this entire story to its end. A few days later, Arion Group held an emergency board meeting. It was my first public appearance since the scandal began. The atmosphere inside the conference room was so heavy that no one spoke unless they had to. Every director and senior executive was present. Daniella sat across from me. Her face was pale, dark circles surrounded her eyes, but she still held herself upright as though refusing to let anyone see how much she was struggling. Robert wasn't there. He had no place in this meeting. The discussion began immediately with the question everyone had come to answer. Should Daniella remain CEO? And how would the company deal with the crisis? Several veteran shareholders spoke first. Their criticism was direct and unforgiving. They blamed Daniella for a series of reckless decisions, questioned the legality of several projects, and argued that her leadership had caused enormous financial losses while seriously damaging the company's reputation. They demanded that she resign immediately and face a full internal investigation. Daniella defended herself with everything she had. She blamed market conditions, claimed that many of the problems were the result of malicious attacks and internal sabotage, and more than once she looked directly at me with anger burning in her eyes. I stayed silent, lightly tapping my fingers against the table while everyone else finished speaking. When the room finally became quiet, I looked up. I agree with Chairman Wang and Chairman Li, I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but the entire room went silent. Daniella stared at me in complete disbelief, as though she couldn't accept what she was hearing. As CEO, Ms. Daniella's recent decisions have exposed Arion Group to unacceptable risks and significant losses. Until the Securities Regulatory Commission and the Commercial Investigation Division complete their investigations, I propose that all of Ms. Daniella's responsibilities as CEO be suspended immediately. Vice President Chang will serve as acting CEO, and an independent investigation team will be formed to examine every related matter. I delivered the proposal in a steady, professional tone. Simon! Daniella suddenly stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. How can you do this? What gives you the right? We built Arion Group together. Without me, this company wouldn't even exist. I calmly met her eyes. Because I'm the chairman and I hold the largest voting shares. And because your actions are destroying the company we built together. You were the one who taught me that business and personal feelings should always stay separate. She let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like something breaking than amusement. Business and personal feelings? She said through trembling lips. You're only doing this because I chose Robert instead of you. This is revenge. You're using every dirty trick you can to destroy me. You've destroyed my life, you've destroyed Arion. So tell me, Simon, what exactly have you gained? I looked at her without the slightest hesitation and answered one word at a time. I gained justice. What I gained, I said calmly, was accountability to the shareholders, the employees, and the company we built together. As for you and Robert, that's your personal relationship. It has nothing to do with this board meeting. When the proposal went to a vote, it passed by an overwhelming majority. With my support and the backing of several senior board members, Daniella was immediately suspended as CEO and ordered to fully cooperate with the investigation. It was as if every bit of strength had left her body. She slowly sank back into her chair, her face completely drained of color, unable to say another word. After the meeting ended and everyone else had left, only the two of us remained in the silent conference room, separated by the long table that had once symbolized everything we built together. After a long silence, she finally looked up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, but the tears were gone. All that remained was exhaustion and resentment. Simon, you won, she said in a voice so hoarse it barely sounded like her. I straightened my jacket before answering. I never wanted to compete with you. You're the one who turned this into a war. She lowered her head for a moment before quietly asking, why? How did we end up like this? We were supposed to. I stopped her before she could finish. There is no we anymore, Daniella. From now on, you're you and I'm me. I'll take over Arion Group, and you and Robert can deal with the lives you've chosen. I didn't wait for another response. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, she called out with heartbreaking desperation, "Simon, you'll regret this. One day you'll regret everything." I never looked back. Regret? Maybe someday I would. But what frightened me far more was spending the rest of my life trapped beneath the weight of betrayal, forever living as the loyal business partner who had accepted being second choice. After Daniella's suspension, the investigation moved quickly. Without her influence and with the evidence Caleb had quietly prepared over the years, the truth behind the Blue Ocean project surfaced almost immediately. The illegal transactions were impossible to deny. At the same time, the dangerous risks buried inside the Star Glow Tech investment agreement were fully exposed, revealing losses that could have devastated the company. Robert's situation collapsed even faster. Surrounded by financial pressure from every direction, his family's company officially declared bankruptcy and entered liquidation. His father never recovered from the shock and passed away in intensive care. Robert himself was taken into custody on suspicion of financial crimes. Rumors spread that he even tried to drag Daniella down with him to save himself, but investigators couldn't find enough evidence to support those claims. Once someone's world begins falling apart, everyone seems eager to help tear down whatever is left. The wealthy young heir who once carried himself with effortless confidence had become a broken man waiting for judgment. Daniella fought desperately to save herself. She tried using every remaining connection she had and even asked to negotiate with me directly, but I refused every request. As scandal after scandal unfolded, the value of her shares dropped sharply, and whatever influence she still had inside the board disappeared. Meanwhile, with Caleb quietly supporting every move, I focused on stabilizing Arion Group from within. The stock price continued to fluctuate, but the company's foundation remained strong. In many ways, removing the corruption allowed the business to recover and begin growing again. I officially stepped into the role of acting CEO and assumed full control of the company's operations. Before long, nobody inside Arion Group spoke Daniella's name anymore. It became a chapter everyone silently agreed to leave behind. 3 months later, on a cold, rainy afternoon, I received a call from the detention center. Robert wanted to see me. I went. Sitting behind the thick glass, wearing a prison uniform, he looked almost unrecognizable. His beard had grown out, his face was hollow, and his eyes had lost every trace of the confidence he once carried. In only a few months, he looked 20 years older. He picked up the phone and stared at me before speaking. "Are you satisfied now?" I remained silent. He forced a bitter smile that looked more painful than tears. "My family's gone. My father's dead. I'm sitting in prison. Daniella lost everything too. Her reputation is destroyed. Simon, you won. You won completely." I calmly shook my head. "I told you before I never wanted to win. This is the road you chose." Robert suddenly slammed his hand against the table, his voice rising with anger. "The road we chose? Stop pretending your hands are clean. If you hadn't pushed us this hard, if you hadn't used all those tricks behind the scenes, none of this would have happened." Daniella never would have. I interrupted him before he could finish. My voice was quiet, but colder than ever. "I pushed you. Did I force Daniella to announce her engagement at the IPO celebration? Did I force you to go after Arion Group's resources? Did I force Daniella to break the law? Did I make either of you turn marriage into nothing more than a business deal?" Robert couldn't answer. He just stared at me with pure hatred burning in his eyes. I looked back at him without the slightest emotion. "Robert, you still don't understand. I wasn't the one who destroyed your life. Your greed destroyed it. Your schemes destroyed it. Your selfish choices destroyed it. And both of you destroyed yourselves the moment you trampled over the 10 years of loyalty and sincerity I gave without asking for anything in return. Everything that's happened is the result of your own decisions." With that, I put the phone back on its cradle. I didn't bother looking at the twisted expression on his face. I simply turned around and walked away. Outside, the cold rain hit my face the moment I stepped out of the detention center. Mason was already waiting with an umbrella. "Back to the company, President Koo?" he asked. I shook my head. Take me somewhere else. We drove to the cemetery on the western edge of the city. At the entrance, I bought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums before walking alone beneath a black umbrella up the wet stone steps. Rain tapped steadily against the umbrella while the entire world disappeared beneath a blanket of gray. Even the city skyline in the distance looked blurred and distant. Halfway up the hill, I stopped in front of my mother's grave. In the photograph on the headstone, she was still smiling with the same gentle warmth I remembered. I placed the flowers down, crouched beside her grave, and carefully wiped the raindrops from her picture with my sleeve. "Mom, I came to see you," I whispered. My voice was almost lost beneath the rain. "I feel like I've done a lot of things lately. Some of them, I honestly don't know if they were right or wrong, but I don't regret them. I'm just tired." The rain grew heavier, soaking the cuffs of my trousers, but I stayed there for a long time, quietly looking at her photograph. When I finally walked back down the hill, the rain had eased. As I reached the cemetery entrance, I noticed someone standing alone by the roadside. It was Daniella. She held an old umbrella over her head, waiting quietly for a taxi. She had lost so much weight that her clothes hung loosely on her body. Her face looked pale and exhausted, and her empty eyes stared into the falling rain as though she had forgotten the world around her. She never noticed me. My car was parked a short distance away. Mason looked at me through the windshield, silently waiting for instructions. I gently shook my head. Standing beneath the shelter, separated from her by nothing but the endless rain, I looked at the woman who had once meant everything to me. Now she felt no different from a stranger. Whatever warmth had once lived inside me had long since disappeared. She never found the respectable marriage and stable future she believed she wanted. And I never found the loyalty and lifelong love I had spent 10 years believing in. In the end, we both lost the most valuable thing we ever had. Maybe that was the only fair ending our story could have had. After a while, a taxi finally arrived. Daniella climbed inside and disappeared into the rain without ever knowing I had been there. "Let's go," I quietly told Mason as I got into the car and leaned back against the seat with my eyes closed. The engine started, carrying us away from the cemetery and back toward the city, where the Arion Group headquarters stood high above everything else. Another battle was waiting for me there, but this one belonged to me alone. I was no longer the man I had once been. The Simon who loved without holding back, who gave someone his entire heart without hesitation, had died on the night of the IPO celebration. The man who remained was the leader of Arion Group, someone whose heart had been hardened by betrayal. Outside the window, the city lights blurred together while the windshield wipers moved steadily across the glass, clearing away the rain one sweep at a time. My phone vibrated. It was another encrypted message from Caleb. "Mr. Koo, the evaluation of the core patents from Robert's family's bankrupt company has been completed. They have significant value. Also, our European partners are very interested in working with us and would like to schedule a video conference next week." I looked at the message for a moment before replying. "Arrange the meeting. Move forward with the patent acquisition as planned." After sending it, I locked the screen. My reflection stared back at me from the dark display. There was almost no expression left on my face. My revenge was over, but life wasn't. Life kept moving forward. The only difference was that, from this moment on, the only person I would ever rely on was myself.